And then you're like, I can support people and like provide comfort and provide perspective for people who are going through that same thing. And then we're going to talk more about what this really means, like what it means when you choose suffering and what that calling can look like. And so the next segment of our message is actually going to be a video from Pastor Tom. He's our lead pastor, and he's the pastor of our Eastwood campus. I always think it's good when we can hear from multiple people, so you're not just hearing what I have to say, that you're also hearing from other folks. And so we're going to continue our message with this.
This idea that we're called to suffering is probably new to many of you. So we're going to talk about 3 different places where we are called to suffer, all right? So if you're sort of freaking out, like you're like, Tom just punched me in the gut, hang with me, okay? I think this is going to make sense. Here is the first place where we are called to suffer. We are called to suffer for the sake of the gospel. In 107 AD, one of the early church leaders, his name was Ignatius of Antioch, was condemned by Rome to death. And so he was, taken from Antioch to Rome. And along the way, he wrote 7 letters to churches that were in different cities that went by where, the Roman authorities were taking him. Does this sound familiar? I mean, this is kind of like the MO for Christians in the day. He's just living into what they did. They wrote letters back and forth to each other. And what's surprising about his letters to these 7 different churches is he tells them to resist the urge to try to fight his execution. Resist the urge to keep him from essentially becoming a martyr. And so when you see pictures of Ignatius of Antioch, you always see that there are lions in the frame, and they're usually chewing on him in some very morbid way because he was persecuted and killed. Throwing him to the wild beasts for the entertainment of Rome. Now, this whole thing is hard for you to understand or even comprehend or imagine. Maybe it would be helpful to think of Ignatius of Antioch the way that artificial intelligence does. Here's an AI rendering of Ignatius of Antioch, which makes him look like a D&D character. Here's what Ignatius said in one of those letters to one of those churches. I am the wheat of God, and I am ground by the teeth of wild beasts, that I may be found the pure bread of God. When I suffer, I shall be the freed man of Jesus Christ, and shall rise again free in him. Ignatius saw it as a goal or a great spiritual practice to submit himself to martyrdom, to suffer for the sake of the good news of Jesus. Now, thankfully, most of us are not faced with the choice to, claim our Christianity or die. But it may still be tempting to think that this was something that happened only in ancient times back in the 2nd century, but it still happens today. In 2015 in Libya, ISIS, the Islamic State of Iraq, they kidnapped 21 Christians in Libya, and they were construction workers that were working in Libya. And they videotaped them, marching them down to the beach, and they gave each one of them the chance to recant their faith or to be executed. And all 21 of them chose to essentially be executed. 20 of them were from Egypt. One was an African Christian from Ghana. And then ISIS posted this video online. This act, of course, was denounced by the government authorities of both Egypt and Libya. It was denounced by the Coptic Church, which is essentially the Christian church in Egypt. But maybe most importantly, it was denounced by Islamic religious leaders in the region. This was a fringe group of Islam, a fringe group of Muslims, not the majority of Muslims. these 21 Christians have now been recognized officially as martyrs by the Coptic Church, that is the Egyptian Christian church, but also the Roman Catholic Church, as 21 people who suffered for the sake of the gospel. Thankfully, probably none of us are ever going to face this sort of persecution or this sort of pressure to suffer in this way. And our suffering in our day and age is maybe going to come more from pressures of, well, is our Christianity or our place in Christianity irrelevant? Or are we embarrassed about being Christians or about what other Christians are doing? I think these are the kind of sufferings that most of us are going to experience for the sake of the gospel today. You may wonder, Tom, what are you talking about, suffering out of irrelevance? Well, let me tell you a story. I do hospital visits from time to time. I'm not the main person who does that. Our pastor, care pastor, Tom Fox, does them. But I am down at Sparrow from time to time. And if you've ever been in Sparrow, you know that there is a Starbucks in the lobby of Sparrow. And so I had my clergy badge on, and that clergy badge cuts through a lot of red tape in the hospital system. And I'm basically like treated as an employee of the hospital, even though I'm not. Well, I walk up to Starbucks, and the barista looks at my badge, and he says, "What's a clergy?" It's clergy. And a clergy is, well, it's basically a pastor. I didn't like give him that much attitude like I'm giving you right now. But I felt it inside. I'm like, are we so irrelevant to what's going on? I mean, this was of course a young barista. I don't know what you're imagining that person looks like, but it's probably not what you're imagining in your head. But there was a sort of like irrelevance, a suffering of irrelevance that I experienced in that moment. And actually, I've adopted that word or that pronunciation of clergy as clergy for the once a month get-togethers that I do with my colleagues. For once a month we get together and we go out to a pub and we have drinks, and I call it clergy night out, just to remind me of my irrelevance to the barista at Starbucks and probably most millennials and Gen Zers. So we may experience the suffering of irrelevance, but we can also, I think, experience the suffering of embarrassment for being a Christian in our day and age and what people think of that. Let me give you a little example of this. When I was looking for seminaries, one of the seminaries that I was exploring was Yale Divinity School. And when I went out to Yale, I contacted a professor there ahead of time. His name is Miroslav Volf. He's a Serbian theologian. He's very well known. He had just moved from one seminary that was known for being kind of a haven for intellectual evangelicals and was newly hired at Yale. And I wanted to meet with him because at that time I had grown up in the evangelical church. I'd gone to Wheaton College, which was like a flagship evangelical school. Going to Yale was like a big jump for me. It was like one of my friends said, "Oh, you're going to go study with the enemies." And that's not what I think right now, but there was this sort of sense in the circles that I grew up in that that's what I was doing. So I had heard that Miroslav Volf was friendly to evangelicals and was an evangelical himself. And I asked if we could meet to talk, and we met. It's like, this is stunning to me. I mean, this is like a world-class theologian. Willing to meet